Welcome everyone to this week's IPLD sync meeting. It's the 25th of April in 2022. And as every week, we talk about the stuff that we have worked on the past 2 weeks and then discuss any open agenda items there might be. First on my list is Mauve. So please give your update.
Hello. I haven't been here since a couple meetings back, but I haven't been up to too much. Mainly been working on the what is IPLD image, updating it to new stuff from Warp Fork, and we got a clean copy from the whiteboard sketch done from the design shop. And Rod gave some useful feedback for adding and removing some stuff from the image and from the wording. So I've just been working on that. Probably going to get it merged soonish. The other thing is that we've set up a reviewers team in the IPLD organization. So part of that is we have this new Github automation thing for making changes to the GitHub org. So we can do pull requests to modify some JSON files to create new teams. And the first team that we have for that is this reviewers team. And so I'm testing it out right now to have an easy way to kind of tag people to review pull requests. Right now, it's just for the IPLD/IPLD repo, which is mostly concerned with like spec work and the website. But potentially, we might look into seeing if we can have a similar approach for the Go IPLD Prime repo or anything else. So that's kind of a work in progress. I've got some docs in the README together, kind of looking to see if we could use it in GitHub issue templates, and also kind of seeing the limitations. So one thing that would be useful is if anyone cares about processes like this, ping me on Discord or Matrix or whatever. Particularly folks on the Go IPLD Prime team, it'd be cool to talk about, or we can talk on this on the GitHub issue. So I think I can link to the issue now. Sorry, I'll link to the issue after. Yeah, and then finally, the other thing is that the IPLD URL scheme document that I put together has been getting more reviews and more kind of like feedback. It's still kind of up in the air on what it will look like. Mainly the questions are like, how much functionality should we or shouldn't we have? A really good feedback that Adine gave was that right now it's not differentiating too much from the IPFS gateway and what it has for loading data in different IPLD formats. But we're kind of talking about what we can do that'll actually make it more useful for developers. As well, I've been talking to my developer friend who's working on the Agrigor mobile dev grants with me. And so we're looking at maybe starting to mess around with some of these IPLD protocols to see if we could make them useful in this like experimental peer-to-peer web context. Probably won't have anything stable until we get some sort of consensus, but we might have time to experiment maybe early to mid May. Yeah, so that's all I've got for now. Yeah, any questions? I'm in Discord and Matrix and everywhere else, or we can talk about it after today.
Thanks. Next on the list is Rod.
Mine's been a little bit scattered across various things, and I'm working on other things while doing little bits and pieces. But I did do a big, huge chunk of work on the weekend because I needed a weekend project. So the JavaScript Bitcoin codec. I wrote this originally to IPLDify the entire Bitcoin chain in 2 years ago. We were going to store it on Filecoin early on, but ran into some hiccups with that. But anyway, I have almost all of the Bitcoin chain IPLDified in and put in car files stored on S3. But the codec itself was written against an experimental version of our newer IPLD stack, and so it doesn't work with anything anymore. It's completely unrecognizable when compared to our current IPLD code, and it's been a to-do for a long time to upgrade it, but just really hard to prioritize because it doesn't really have a user. Anyway, I did that on the weekend because it was just a bit of fun, and it's nearly all done. Actually, a lot of work, but really satisfying to have such a complex codec working. So it does the entirety of the Bitcoin content address structure, there's a whole lot of other bits of tool chain that I want to get working again, so that I can incrementally keep on extracting all the data and possibly actually eventually publish it to the DHT in some form. But I'll be talking to Adine about how to do that with the billions of blocks. So yeah, a fun little thing. There was a security release. I think this was published a couple of weeks ago. It was fixed maybe a month ago in the DAGPB codec that Go IPLD Prime uses whenever you use DAGPB. So underneath UnixFS. So this is in Lotus and Go IPFS and a bunch of other places. So certain blocks are a problem. So there's the security advisory on GitHub. If you're using Go Codec DAGPB on GitHub, then GitHub should be alerting you to this, the need to upgrade for this. I think Dependabot will show up and do this regardless of whether you have Dependabot enabled or not. That's actually a really nice feature of GitHub security advisories. So yeah. What's this one? Just a little minor fix in Go IPLD Prime to get Mac OS testing working. Just to remove I think it was either a flaky or just a failing test. And so that gets us a step towards this unified CI platform that we're using across all our repos. The next step is Windows, which I might chew off at some point in the future, but this is sort of lower priority work. And lastly, just a note, I did a walkthrough with Lindsay, who's running the Protocol Labs Network Launchpad program. A tutorial that I like, a hands-on tutorial that I found really helpful when trying to explain IPLD and graphs and roots and snapshots and all these concepts to some new folks. I did this last year with a couple of people, and they found it really valuable. So I wrote it up, and I took Lindsay through it on video, and she's recorded that and put that on YouTube. And they've used it for this current iteration of Launchpad. She might be making it more profesh and doing a better version of it for maybe a future version. But I quite like this as a hands-on way to talk about these concepts using UnixFS, and it's inspecting a DAG and looking at roots and the CIDs, and it actually uses the what's the Fleek. So it actually uses the IPLD/IPLD repo, which has auto publishing on Fleek. So to make a new DAG, to modify the DAG, anyone walking through this tutorial just has to open a pull request to that repo. And that's what I say in the instructions: open a pull request, and we won't merge it. But Fleek will automatically build your branches. So it's a good way for anyone learning to create a whole new DAG and then inspect the DAG. It's not quite as nice as would be good, because one of the problems we have with that, one of the features we have enabled on that repo is we have cache busting timestamps on all the links. So you don't get the really nice deduplication of files and directories that you would do otherwise. But there is a way of demonstrating it. Anyway, that's a bit of fun, and that's me. Adine, over to you.
All right. Yeah, so I got pointed by Rod at some stuff that Irakli was thinking about with UCANs. I think there's a bunch to like extract from this that's been interesting. And probably more to go on here, which is, I think there's some stress between like, well, there's like, what's a codec, what's an ADL, what are all of these things, especially when you're coming from the JavaScript stack where a lot of this is less well-defined or not there at all. And then there's like, even if the stack, was matching what Go had or is matching the things that we wish were in Go at the moment, a lot of IPLD is dealt around like, how do I structure and restructure and reinterpret data? And signatures sort of look like that, but they're not really like that. Right, it's just like, oh yeah, the data looks exactly the same as it did before. It's just, I've checked it now. And throughout like most of IPLD, it's like, if all else fails and you don't know where to put something, make a new codec. And so the question is like, is there something better we can be doing or suggesting here for people who are starting fresh? Codecs are sort of always the answer for your backwards compatibility with some, random format. But if you're starting something newer, is there like a better way, right, that engenders more compatibility? So I was thinking a little bit about that, and some conversation that will probably continue from there. Something I decided to do yesterday, because I was like, yeah, why not, is I hear SHA-1 has collisions, and that also like places like Git have been running some C code to check if you are using something that seems collision-like. And that's how they've been getting away with not upgrading to SHA-2 like several years ago. And so I was like, sure, let's just do CGO, and made a wrapper for it. Seems easy enough. The main issue is that the Go multi-hash uses the Go interface for hashes, which don't have errors anywhere. And so what is a poor SHA-1 to do when it's found a collision and wants to tell you that like, please don't use me? And so maybe we want to make some changes there. All of my prototype code you've seen me like demo in the last session or so is now up on GitHub. I am hoping to have more specs for people to look at so they don't have to read gross code for next time. And I guess the last one is, something's been floating around my mind recently, which is, even if we have a protocol for transferring large blocks around in an incrementally verifiable way, people have been leaning on using car files as a data transport, which means we might need to modify or have some way of working with car files that have these large blocks. Like if I have a 20 megabyte block and I put it in a car file, my car file no longer starts like losing some of its incremental verifiability properties, which is no good. Yeah, so those are some things I've been thinking about.
Thanks. I just reminded myself that I also have something IPLD related. I was talking to the Lurk people, that some people might not know what it is. So Lurk is kind of like an VM for snarks, so zero knowledge proof stuff. And they want to, or like they have, so their data is content addressed, and they want to have an IPLD model for it, or like want to like, so the goal is to find a way on how to represent those things in IPLD. And I've also linked a document which explains all those things. And we are still discussing, because, so I think I have a fairly good understanding, but it's still, the questions are around like, again, which we had previously with like, what is a codec? Should it be a codec? Should it be a multi-hash? Where do we do the signaling? Is it, if we put another codec in, is it more about the semantics? And so, so I get where they're coming from, but my goal really is that we find a way that it's interoperable with what we currently have, ideally, because like they need slightly different things, and like, so it's an interesting problem. I'm still talking to them. There's also a Discord server, but also bridge to matrix in case someone is interested in. And yeah, so there's basically an IPLD channel for the work project where we're discussing. And yeah, so I think this week I have another meeting with someone from the folks, and I hope we can figure it out. But yeah, I'm still not happy what we came up with, and yeah, we'll see how this goes. But I think this document in the meeting notes, because like I think it's a really nice write-up, and like it's clearly that the folks understand like what IPLD is, and there might be some edge cases, but still like I think it's a really good document on how to like think about data and yeah, how to do things. So yeah, we'll see how this turns out. So I keep everyone updated once we come up with something, because eventually they need codecs, and then we need to discuss it on the repository on like how to actually do it. Yeah, interesting use case. Yeah. All right. So does anyone else wants to give an update or share news or anything? If not, then I have put an agenda item on the list, because one thing, but it's just like, it should be a long discussion. It's just something I wanted to mention, because I had a meeting with Eric like 2 or 3 weeks ago. And what was kind of interesting is that we came on like what is IPLD actually useful for? And then also discussed like about this current state and about this future state, and what then my thoughts were like, what I really would be interested in what like how people see what their vision is of IPLD, or like what it enables in the future, and really like in the long term. So basically, what is your ideal IPLD thing that you want to build? Because I kind of agreed with Eric that what we currently have in either of the stacks is kind of like, it's kind of useful, but it's not like so useful that like basically if someone says, I just use protocol buffers, what would your answer be? Like, yeah, just use IPLD, because like I also see it kind of like currently you don't have that many benefits. You might have in the future, but it's kind of like, to me, like it's hard to sell to say, well, eventually you might. Or also like interesting is like, for example, like years ago, like I would say it was 3 years ago, I've had a long chat in Portugal with Stibelli and on how like his vision is like with the whole like type system and programming languages and stuff like this, which is totally interesting. But I think I never like, it's on my to-do list to write down what we discussed there. I don't think I remember anything, but I didn't, so I should have, because it would be now nice to read. So basically what I would like to see, if people want to talk about, or like basically if they want to write down something like how they envision IPLD or how it might be useful in the long term, I think would be totally interesting, because I feel like so many people have so many different ideas on what IPLD is or what it could be, that yeah, it might be interesting to basically get the visions written down, or yeah, kind of like an exploration report or something, so then people can later refer onto and say, well, like that's what I want to build. Yeah, just as an idea to think about. Because like for me, if I'm so deep into it, it's like kind of like I'm oh, is there also an English saying that you can't see, so the literal translation is you can't see the
trees for the
The
forest.
trees for the, yeah.
For
exactly.
The
okay.
trees. Can't see the forest for the trees, is it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Kind of feels like this a bit sometimes. So. Cool.
The thing I go with most of the time, I think this is important because I think probably Rod noticed this too when talking to some of like the Launchpad folks or the people who are getting newer, is sometimes they get lost. I mean, I've been seeing some of our documentation. I think the one of the posts announcing Lyric linked to some other projects in the space that are using IPLD in some way, and they referred to storing data in an IPLD format, which I don't think is like a semantically valid statement. Which means like we probably have like a bunch of work to do in communicating what these things are. But my like go-to of like, I couldn't have done this without IPLD, right, is you know, sort of backwards compatibility. Like backwards compatibility things within like the IPFS context. Like I just want to move around graphs. Don't care whose graphs they are or what their form was. If they're hash link graphs, I want to move them around. And kind of, if you just stick with like a protobuf, it doesn't work. If you stick with a protobuf, what you end up with is BitTorrent, which is like they chose a format for files and directories and the way they were going to structure it. There's only one way, and that's how you do it. Or you could do what Git did, which is they not only did, they did that, and then they also decided they were going to hard code their hash functions while they were there. And then when it broke, they were going to like hard code them a second time instead of learning the lesson, right? And so I feel like most of this is about like being able to build the tools that do what you want to do without being locked into some of the irrelevant decisions around like, how exactly did I structure my bytes on the wire? Or like, which of these mostly identical hash functions did I actually use? You get to build tooling that doesn't care about that, so you can afford to be wrong and fix it later. But that's just me.
I keep on reflecting on the blockchain problem that we have, and I call it a problem because it is a problem for us because the blockchains use content addressing for a different reason than we view it. Like, and actually, it's not just blockchains, but it is particularly apparent in blockchains. Blockchains use content addressing for a consensus mechanism, for inclusion, for doing Merkle proofs essentially. We use content addressing for from a navigation perspective. So they want to go upwards and get a root hash, and that's your signifier. We want to go downwards because we want to navigate to data. And blockchains never want to navigate by content address. They want to assure that the data being looked at is part of the root content address. But once you've done that, it's like, well, yeah, whatever. And so we keep on bumping into these data structures that are content addressed, but really hacky in a way where you can see they're built for the inclusion problem. How do we get this bit of data included in the root hash? And it's not for the navigation problem at all. So every blockchain other than Filecoin has this problem for it when we apply IPLD to it, of trying to make it fit. And it's really, some of it's really nasty too. And that sort of exposes a lot of the weaknesses of IPLD. But I like, there's a quote that I used across all the Launchpad material for IPLD that Eric said, which is that he said that building the next Git should take hours, not days. And that's the way I tried to frame it for Launchpad. And I think Git is a really nice example of it, an application that actually uses content addressing for a bit of navigation, because people use the hashes to dig down into things, but it does produce a very clean content address tree. So there are applications outside of the sort of the consensus, the pure consensus blockchain model that is a little bit more like what we want to do with navigation. But I think that's really the heart of our thing, where we come to IPLD and content addressing from the IPFS lens of we want to share and navigate data. And that's not what a lot of content address systems are doing.
Yes, that's kind of like it's a similar problem to the problem with the lurk data, which is also like it's content addressed, but like everything is a field element, and like it's not really like, it is hashes, but it's a field element. So it's a hash and a field element, and like it gets tricky, and it's like so basically it gets into the cryptographic space, and then it's just so and coming from there, something that Porsu said, which I kind of agree with, is like, he says that from his understanding of what I see a CID is supposed to do, it fits totally what they want to do. But the problem is that our CIDs don't fit, or like, basically the format we were choosing doesn't really fit in. And it's kind of interesting that they really have content address pointers, but doesn't fit our CID model quite well. So yeah, we'll see. Yeah, so for me, like as people were sharing their thoughts, so one thing I'd like to see is like, I also see the power of content addressing. And what I'd really like to see is like, yeah, just an easier way to like build your applications in your data structures. Let's say you build a to-do list or whatever, and you can just make it in a content addressed way, and it's just easy. And then you get basically all the benefits of being content addressed, like you can replicate it easily and you can address it easily and so on, but you don't really have to think about it. And hopefully, like to me, hopefully IPLD will help with those things. Yeah. Cool.
Carson had one that he posted on the channel because he can't get Zoom to work this time, but we'll endeavor to next time. Which is, I'd also suggest that IPLD is just a really practical implementation of the promise of linked open data. And there's something extremely powerful in having a practical implementation of something as complex as linked data.
True.
And on that point, that's one of the things that, like, the vision for IPLD that I really would like to see us, I personally would like to pursue, is being able to have a greater offering of data structures above it. So you know, a HAMP is our workhorse, but we really do need a lot more optionality for storing data that can build towards, so people can really use their content address data as a database that suits their application. You know, getting a couple of options for sorted data structures would be really awesome. Getting more practical HAMP implementation, and just really taking away the pain of that layer, which we don't do. Like, even doing it now in any language, in any of the stacks, you know, the version 0 or version 1 of Go, version 0.1 of JavaScript, it's all sort of mangy and not very happy to play with. But really getting a really nice interface where you can just take this piece and then build a really complex database type thing in content address Java. That would achieve a kind of vision that I have for IPLD.
And there was also in that chat, there was a question on where to submit Eurovision if you have one. So I propose, so in the IPLD, so in a GitHub IPLD/IPLD repository, we have a subdirectory called Notebook, where we store things called exploration reports, but it's just a fancy name to kind of like, you explored something, it could even be a vision, and you just want to put it somewhere where it is persisted and you can link to it and people can discuss. So I would propose making a PR to this directory and then, have it there.
Yeah,
so
and anyone's welcome to do that too.
Yeah, so it's like, yeah, it's just open for everyone, and just like, so there won't be like, so I wouldn't expect like someone so it will just be merged basically, because yeah, it's your exploration. Cool. Yeah.
I have some ideas coming from the peer-to-peer web space, because like one thing I see in having made things using different peer-to-peer web protocols is, like, right now, a lot of the focus is on reading data being produced by somewhere else. And a lot of the data is in just these like really plain formats, like files or pretty much files. And I see IPLD as having the potential to have a lot more advanced data structures. So for example, like databases where you can have index data where people can quickly traverse through an arbitrary data set and just quickly download just what they need. And so applications could author data locally and publish to these indexes, and they could merge other people's data together. So I see it as a way to kind of like work with data in a more raw way than what BitTorrent or IPFS itself can offer. Yeah, because files are great, but they're not very great for performance when you have really complex structures. So I see that taking off more as we get more ADLs and signaling for ADLs figured out, and like more implementations and people actually building stuff on top of it.
Thanks. All right. Anything else from anyone? I need to check the notes.
And if people are down to talk about signatures and such, and how we might do those sorts of things, I'd be interested. But if that's not what the crowd's interested in, then no worries.
They're fine with me. I mean,
yeah. Oh, Rod, do you have a thought?
I've got lots of thoughts, but nothing I want to
Yeah, I don't know. I've just been thinking recently, like if you were trying to, when we see people who try and do like sign data that they're moving around, or that they're putting as IPLD, and maybe they want to move around over IPFS or store on Filecoin or whatever. I think sometimes what we run into is there's like two different pieces of the thing. One is, and it sort of it seems to boil down to, if I requested the data by CID and the data had an invalid signature, would I want to be able to look at it, or would I want the tooling to yell at me? Right? And if I want the tooling to yell at me, then it means like somewhere, sort of deeper in the IPLD layers, it needs to be like, nope, this thing wasn't signed properly, reject, right? Maybe that's a codec or something. And if the answer is like, no, I'm okay, I'm okay, traversing or doing all sorts of things with this data that is, is not signed, and like, we'll figure out somewhere else in the stack where we do this, or we do this like validation of, is this the thing that is safe, right? And that's like a different story. And that might be like one avenue where we start to like pull at this. Like I know the IPLD docs currently, some people like it, some people don't. Take sort of a, we're going to give you all the information kind of stance, where whenever there's like a tricky problem, it doesn't like assert this is the way to solve that problem. It just sort of lays out for you what the options are. If we were going to continue down that route of sort of laying out what the options were, this feels like another one of those to help people who do signatures understand, like, which of these behaviors do you want? But I think also there's probably a good argument to be made for a simplified, or, less, for those who aren't so interested in all of the optionality, like what's the basic go-tos here? We have the same thing sort of in the IPFS specs, where there's probably going to be a lot of specs for a lot of things. And we probably want to have a subset of them that are the, you just want to get going, do ABC, as opposed to here are the 1,000 things you might choose to implement if you want to do all of them.
I had something similar with, I had basically that problem when I was helping out with the DAG Jose codec, where it can do all of the things with signing. And it's like built around best practice, like the Jose spec around the JWS spec around signing is very sophisticated, because it does. It can allow all the different algorithms and the different, some of the modern modalities of signing. But that leaves you with this problem of, okay, I just want to sign some stuff. What do I do? What is the best practice? What can I actually just pick off the shelf and put in? And you can do that with DAG Jose. But I was writing an example of how to do it, and one in Go and one in JavaScript, so that you could produce and consume the same data. And coming up with a solution that worked in both was, I can't remember whether I actually got to there in the end, but it was really difficult, because both languages, the tool set available in both languages had chosen different options for their best practice and the things they supported. So even that was difficult because of the option space was so huge. And I think that's just that's sort of one of these problems with cryptography, is we say this is a very serious problem. So we're going to open up the optionality and we're going to write lots about it and make it buyer beware. Because if we push one thing onto you, then we're going to be responsible when that thing breaks. And we all do that all the way down the stack to the end user, where they get this plethora of options. Okay, what signatures do I need to enable in my TLS config in my web server? I don't know. Yeah, it seems like a very generic problem. And if we're brave, we'd pick it off and say, here's the way that you should do it, and maybe here's a backup way in case that one breaks.
I feel like I don't know if it's quite the same thing, but it's kind of like if the backend underneath everything is sort of generic enough that you can plug in the different things, then it should enable you to better tell someone, like, here is a recommended way to do something, because if you're wrong, they have more outs, as opposed to if you were sort of hard coding everything, you'd have to tell them, like, here are all of the various things you should be very careful of before you hard code which is like the best hash function. Whereas, like, if you didn't care, or like if you had the ability to choose, you could be like, well, I don't know, just use SHA-2, it's probably fine. Right? And let people, like, oh, okay, turns out SHA-2 sucks, Blake 3 is the new thing. All right, fine. People start switching over to Blake 3 because, like, you have the pluggability.
It's the recommendations, I think, is the tricky bit, coming up with that and then asserting that strongly enough that people are going to use the sensible thing.
All right. So, last call for agenda items or anything else? All right, then, yeah, but also I always forget to mention that we now close the live streamings, but if you want to hang out, we sometimes discuss also off-topic things or just hang out. So feel free to hang out even after I close the meeting and close the live stream. All right, but for the live stream, it's enough for today. So yeah, see you all in 2 weeks again. Goodbye.